Most people think of the Dakota apartments as an elegant relic of old New York, a dignified residence overlooking Central Park, a place of quiet wealth, thick walls, and celebrity privacy. But from the moment its foundations were poured into mud and swamp, this building was never meant to be welcoming. It was designed as a fortress, a barrier against outsiders. And yet, instead of keeping danger out, the Dakota drew it in. Witches, whispers, unexplained deaths, and finally, gunshots echoing through the archway on a cold December night. This is the story of how a building built to exclude the world invited darkness to stand right at its door. Chapter 1. A fortress rises from the mud. The land where the Dakota stands was once so remote that New Yorkers joked only wild animals would dare live there. In 1879, Manhattan ended at Central Park. Beyond that green boundary lay nothing but dirt roads, scattered farms, and rocky outcroppings where goats grazed between muddy streams. The Upper West Side was wilderness, a place where respectable families refused to build because infrastructure had not arrived yet. No gas lines, no proper sewage, no police patrols worth mentioning. It was cheaper to buy land there, certainly, but value meant nothing if you lived too far from civilization to enjoy it. Edward Clark understood this perfectly. He knew the risk. The Singer Sewing Machine Company had made him one of the wealthiest men in America, and wealth taught lessons that poverty never could. One of those lessons was simple. Exclusivity requires distance. Clark wanted to build an apartment building, but not just any apartment building. New York already had plenty of those. Cramped tenements where immigrants stacked themselves 6 to a room, where disease spread through hallways faster than gossip. The wealthy lived in private townhouses, never apartments. Apartments were for people with no choices. Clark intended to change that perception entirely. He would create a residence so grand, so isolated, so meticulously designed that living there would signal wealth louder than any private mansion ever could. But first, he needed land that nobody else wanted. He chose a plot at the corner of 72nd Street and Central Park West. 72nd Street barely existed. Central Park West was a name on a map, not a real avenue. The area was so remote that critics mocked the project immediately. They called it Clark's Folly. They said he might as well build in the Dakota Territory, that blank space on maps where America ended and wilderness began. The name stuck. The Dakota. A joke that became a brand. Clark hired Henry Janeway Hardenberg, an architect who understood that buildings could speak. Hardenberg designed the Dakota as a fortress dressed in elegance. The structure would rise 8 stories tall, enormous by the standards of 18 A&T, built from pale yellow brick and dark terracotta trim. It would have a central courtyard, sealed off from the street, accessible only through a single guarded archway. 73 apartments total, each one massive, some with 20 rooms or more. Walls 16 inches thick, floors insulated with multiple layers to ensure that no sound traveled between units. Windows facing inward toward the courtyard, away from the city beyond. Every design choice reinforced the same message. You are separate. You are protected. You are unreachable. Construction began in 1880. Workers poured foundations deep into muddy soil that had never supported anything heavier than wooden shacks. They hauled limestone and iron up dirt paths that turned to soup when it rained. The project cost over $2 million, a staggering sum when tenement buildings a few blocks south cost $15,000. That ratio mattered. Clark was not just building apartments. He was building a barrier between his residence and everyone else. The Dakota opened in 1884. Edward Clark never saw it finished. He died months before the first tenant moved in, his fortune secured, his vision complete. The building stood alone on the edge of the park, glowing pale against empty fields. It looked like a European palace dropped into American mud, imposing, untouchable, exactly as intended. And people came. Chapter 2. Architecture designed to exclude. Every corner, archway, and hallway of the Dakota was designed to say no before anyone even knocked. The entrance on 72nd Street was not welcoming. It was a test. Visitors passed through a vaulted stone archway guarded by attendants who knew every resident by sight. Beyond the arch lay the courtyard, a quiet internal space surrounded by balconies and iron railings. The courtyard was beautiful, yes, but its purpose was not beauty. Its purpose was control. Everyone entering or leaving the building had to cross that open space, visible from dozens of windows above. Privacy for residents, surveillance for outsiders. Inside, the apartments themselves functioned as private universes. Units ranged from 4 rooms to 20. Ceilings soared 12 feet high. Fireplaces warmed parlors lined with mahogany. Servants' quarters occupied separate sections, accessed by hidden staircases that allowed staff to move invisibly through the building. The wealthiest residents never saw their servants unless summoned. Walls between apartments measured 16 inches thick, packed with brick, plaster, and insulation. Conversations did not carry, footsteps did not echo. Each family lived in perfect, padded silence. The building included modern luxuries that most of Manhattan lacked: central heating, elevators, private bathrooms in every unit. A central power plant in the basement generated electricity years before the city grid reached the Upper West Side. Deliveries arrived through separate service entrances. Garbage disappeared down dedicated chutes. Residents could live entire lives without encountering anyone they did not wish to see. Hardenberg built separation into every floor plan. The Dakota had 4 separate entrances, each leading to its own elevator and staircase. Residents in the north section never needed to encounter residents in the south. This was not accidental. Wealthy families valued privacy above convenience. They wanted to live near other wealthy families, certainly, but not with them. Not mingling in shared hallways, not making small talk while waiting for elevators. The roofline added another layer of symbolism. Dormers, gables, and steep slate roofs gave the Dakota a Gothic silhouette that looked nothing like American architecture. It looked European, old world, the kind of building where nobility lived behind guarded gates. That visual language mattered. Wealth in 1884, New York was new and raw. Industrial fortunes built on sewing machines, railroads, steel. The Dakota offered something those fortunes desperately wanted: the appearance of old money, the illusion of inherited power. Critics who had mocked the location now praised the execution. The building became a status symbol faster than Clark had predicted. Wealthy families competed for apartments. Lawyers, financiers, and industrial heirs signed leases. Rental prices exceeded anything Manhattan had seen, and yet demand continued. Because the Dakota offered more than shelter. It offered separation. It offered the right to live above the city, both literally and socially. By 1890, the wilderness surrounding the Dakota began to fill with other buildings. Developers realized that Clark had been right. The Upper West Side was the future. Streets received pavement. Gas lines arrived. Electric wires stretched between poles. The neighborhood transformed from wasteland to desirable address in less than a decade. But the Dakota never lost its edge. Other buildings rose nearby, some even taller, but none matched its presence. None had walls that thick. None had courtyards that private. None required that level of scrutiny just to enter. The Dakota remained what it had always been, a fortress that happened to offer apartments, a place designed to keep the world at arm's length. And the residents loved it for exactly that reason. Chapter 3. The dream becomes untouchable. By the time the first residents moved in, the Dakota was no longer a building, but a statement of power. Living at the Dakota meant something specific in the 1890s. It meant you had arrived. Not just financially, though rent exceeded what most New Yorkers earned in a year. It meant you had achieved the kind of wealth that allowed you to choose isolation over accessibility. You could afford to live far from commerce, far from noise, far from people who did not matter. You had earned the right to retreat. The residents reflected this philosophy precisely. Boris Karloff, before his Hollywood fame, kept an apartment there. Roberta Flack would eventually call it home. Judy Garland lived there briefly. Leonard Bernstein composed behind those thick walls. These were people who valued privacy as much as luxury. People who needed space between themselves and their public lives. The Dakota provided that space without compromise. Each apartment became a world unto itself. Families furnished their units with European antiques, Persian rugs, and oil paintings in gilded frames. Dinner parties hosted 20 guests in dining rooms larger than most tenement apartments. Children played in nurseries supervised by nannies who lived in quarters smaller than closets. This was the Gilded Age made domestic. Excess as architecture, comfort as fortress. The building's reputation grew alongside its resident list. Journalists described the Dakota as impenetrable. Society columnists tracked who lived there, who visited, who got rejected. The co-op board, established early in the building's history, became legendary for its rejection rate. Wealth alone did not guarantee acceptance. You needed the right kind of wealth, the quiet kind, the inherited kind, or at least wealth that behaved as if it had been inherited. Stories circulated about applicants turned away. A banker's son denied because his father made money too recently. An actress rejected because fame was too loud, too public. The Dakota wanted residents who understood discretion, who valued privacy over status displays, who would never draw unwanted attention to the building or its occupants. This selectivity created its own mythology. The Dakota became more than expensive real estate. It became a symbol of American aristocracy, a club without formal rules but absolute standards. Living there meant you belonged to something exclusive, something that could not be bought, only granted. Property values reflected this mystique. By 1900, Dakota apartments sold for sums that seemed absurd, even to wealthy buyers. A 4-room unit might cost what a townhouse sold for elsewhere in Manhattan. Larger apartments commanded prices that exceeded small estates. And yet people paid. Because the Dakota offered something money usually could not buy. The certainty that your neighbors were exactly like you. Wealthy, private, unlikely to disturb your peace. But isolation has consequences that wealth cannot prevent. The Dakota's fortress design, so appealing to residents seeking separation, also created perfect conditions for secrecy. Thick walls meant neighbors never heard arguments, never noticed anything unusual. Private entrances meant residents came and went without observation. Servants, bound by employment and discretion, rarely spoke about what they witnessed. The building that promised safety through separation also guaranteed that whatever happened inside stayed inside. And things were happening inside. Rumors began quietly, the way rumors always do in insulated communities. Whispers among staff. Odd observations shared between trusted friends. Nothing concrete, nothing provable. Just a growing sense that the Dakota, for all its grandeur and careful construction, harbored secrets that its architecture had never intended to conceal. The fortress had been built. The residents had arrived. The dream was complete. Now came the darkness. Chapter 4. Whispers behind closed doors. The first rumors did not come from newspapers, but from servants, guards, and those who cleaned the halls at night. Staff members talked. They always did. And what they talked about in the 1890s and early 1900s was the strange energy inside the Dakota. Not all of it, not everywhere. But in certain apartments, on certain floors, during certain hours, something felt wrong. Doors that should not open did. Shadows appeared in hallways where no one stood. Cold spots lingered near windows, even when radiators blazed. One story circulated persistently. A housekeeper reported seeing a young girl in old-fashioned clothing wandering the fourth floor. The child appeared and disappeared without sound. The housekeeper mentioned it to other staff. 2 others confirmed similar sightings. Always the same girl, always silent, always gone before anyone could approach. Rational explanations existed. The Dakota's design created optical illusions. Long hallways with mirrors at both ends could make reflections appear as figures. Thick walls trapped cold air in pockets near windows. Steam heat created temperature variations that felt like cold spots. Architecture, not spirits, caused these phenomena. But rational explanations competed with cultural context. The late 1800s marked the peak of American spiritualism. Seances were fashionable. Mediums held court in wealthy parlors. The idea that spirits lingered in buildings, especially old buildings or buildings constructed on significant land, was widely accepted. The Dakota, built on land that had been empty wilderness, seemed exactly the kind of place where energies might gather. Some residents embraced this possibility. Records suggest that at least 3 apartments hosted regular seances during the 1890s. Wealthy women invited mediums to contact deceased relatives. Spiritualism offered comfort to people who had lost children to disease, husbands to accidents, fortunes to bad investments. The Dakota's thick walls provided perfect privacy for such gatherings. No neighbors would hear. No outsiders would intrude. Whether these seances produced genuine spiritual contact or elaborate theater remains unknowable. What matters is belief. Residents believed, staff believed, and belief shaped behavior. People avoided certain hallways after dark. Apartments gained reputations. The unit on the 7th floor where a banker died of heart failure became difficult to rent. The apartment on the 3rd floor where a widow claimed to contact her husband drew curious visitors. Newspapers eventually noticed. By 1910, the Dakota appeared in spiritualist publications as a confirmed site of supernatural activity. Articles described ghostly encounters, unexplained sounds, and apartments where occupants reported feeling watched. These publications had limited circulation, read mostly by spiritualism enthusiasts, but they established the Dakota's occult reputation early. The building's management never confirmed or denied these stories. Confirmation would validate rumors that might scare away potential residents. Denial would insult current residents who believed their experiences were real. Silence became policy. Let people believe what they wanted. Let the rumors circulate. As long as apartments stayed occupied and rent checks arrived, the building's reputation, whether haunted or not, remained a private matter. But private matters have a way of becoming public when tragedy provides evidence. The first documented death at the Dakota occurred in 1886, just 2 years after opening. A resident named Louis Stark died in his apartment under circumstances described as natural. Heart failure, common enough for a man in his 60s. His family moved out. The apartment was cleaned, repainted, and re-rented within months. Then came another death, and another. Between 1886 and 1910, at least 9 residents died inside Dakota apartments, most from natural causes: age, disease, the expected toll of time. But 3 deaths raised questions. A young woman found dead in her bathtub, cause undetermined. A businessman who fell from his apartment window, ruled accidental. A child who died of fever despite access to the best medical care Manhattan offered. Were these deaths unusual? Statistically, no. The Dakota housed over 70 families. People die, especially in an era when medicine could not cure pneumonia, when infections killed otherwise healthy adults, when accidents happened because safety standards did not exist. But perception matters more than statistics. 9 deaths in 24 years became 9 deaths in one building. A pattern, a clustering. And once people noticed the pattern, they began looking for explanations beyond medicine and chance. Staff members whispered that certain apartments felt different after someone died there. Heavier, colder. One maintenance worker refused to enter a specific unit on the 6th floor, claiming he heard voices when no one was present. He was reassigned without question. The building could afford to accommodate superstition. Victorian culture provided frameworks for interpreting these experiences. Spiritualism taught that violent or sudden deaths created restless spirits. Architecture itself could trap energy, especially buildings with thick walls and limited airflow. The Dakota, designed to contain sound and temperature, might also contain something less tangible, something that accumulated over time. None of this was provable, but none of it was dismissible either. The Dakota's reputation evolved. It remained prestigious. Apartments still commanded premium prices. Wealthy families still competed for residency. But underneath that prestige, a secondary narrative developed. The Dakota was not just exclusive, it was strange. Not just private, it was secretive. Not just expensive, it was haunted. And that duality, that tension between luxury and unease, became part of the building's identity. Residents accepted it, some even valued it. Living at the Dakota meant living with mystery, with rumors that could not be confirmed or denied, with the possibility that the fortress protecting you from the outside world might contain something unsettling within. The whispers continued, the deaths continued, and the Dakota, silent and imposing, offered no explanations. Chapter 5. Tragedy finds an address. When deaths occur repeatedly in one place, coincidence begins to feel like pattern. By 1930, the Dakota had witnessed over 24 resident deaths. Most were unremarkable. Elderly residents passing peacefully. Expected losses in a building that housed hundreds over decades. But 5 deaths stood apart, not because they were necessarily connected, but because they were unexpected, sudden. The kind that made people ask questions. In 1923, a prominent lawyer named Martin Greenfield died in his Dakota apartment. Heart attack, according to the medical examiner. He was 48 years old. no prior health complaints. His wife found him collapsed in his study. The funeral was private. The apartment sold within a year. In 1928, a young mother named Dorothy Camden fell ill with what doctors initially diagnosed as influenza. Her condition worsened rapidly. She died within a week, her body ravaged by infection that modern medicine could not stop. She was 31. Her daughter, who had been staying with relatives during her mother's illness, never returned to the Dakota. Yet her father sold the apartment and moved to Philadelphia. In 1932, a teenager named Robert Aldridge died of what was officially ruled accidental poisoning. He had been experimenting with chemicals in a makeshift laboratory in his family's apartment. An explosion did not occur. He simply ingested something toxic. His parents, devastated, left the Dakota immediately. The apartment remained vacant for 8 months before new residents moved in. These deaths, separated by years, had nothing in common medically: heart failure, infection, accidental poisoning, unrelated causes, different ages, different circumstances, but they shared one commonality. They all happened inside the Dakota, and that commonality fed perception. Residents began discussing the building's history more openly. How many people had died here? Was it more than other buildings? Should it be? The Dakota housed wealthy families with access to excellent medical care, better nutrition, safer living conditions than average New Yorkers. Shouldn't the death rate be lower? No comprehensive study existed to answer these questions. Record keeping in the 1920s and 30s was inconsistent. Building management did not track mortality rates, but the absence of data did not stop speculation. People counted what they remembered. They compared notes. They arrived at numbers that felt significant, even if they were not statistically unusual. The spiritualist interpretation gained strength. If the Dakota was built on land with spiritual significance, if seances had opened doorways that were never properly closed, if residual energy from earlier deaths lingered in the walls, then perhaps these tragedies were not random. Perhaps the building itself created conditions that invited misfortune. This interpretation was unfalsifiable. How do you prove a building is not haunted? How do you demonstrate that walls do not hold energy? You cannot. And so the interpretation persisted alongside rational explanations, neither provable, neither dismissible. The 1940s brought new deaths. An elderly woman who lived alone was found deceased in her apartment 3 days after she died. Natural causes. But the delay in discovery disturbed other residents. How could someone die in a building this exclusive and go unnoticed for 3 days? What did that say about community, about neighbors, about the isolation that thick walls created? In 1947, a young man named Thomas Wheeler jumped from his 8th-floor apartment window. Suicide, clear and documented. He left a note. Depression, it said. Personal failures. Nothing related to the building. And yet his death reawakened conversations about the Dakota's dark reputation. How many suicides had occurred here? Were there more than expected? Again, no data existed to answer definitively. By 1950, the Dakota's history included at least 40 documented deaths. Some natural, some accidental, some self-inflicted, some unexplained. That number represented decades of occupancy by hundreds of people, statistically unremarkable. But statistics do not shape perception the way stories do. Each death became a story. Each story reinforced the narrative that the Dakota was more than a building. It was a place where darkness gathered, where tragedies repeated, where the fortress designed to protect its residents somehow failed them in their most vulnerable moments. Medical science could explain every individual death: heart disease, infection, mental illness, accidents. But medicine could not explain why people felt uneasy walking certain hallways, why certain apartments stayed vacant longer than others, why staff members refused assignments in specific units. Those explanations required something beyond physiology. They required belief in forces that science had not yet measured. And then Hollywood arrived. Chapter 6. Hollywood opens the door. When cameras entered the Dakota, fiction and fear began to blur in dangerous ways. In 1967, director Roman Polanski needed a location for his new film, Rosemary's Baby. The story followed a young woman who suspects her neighbors are part of a satanic cult. She becomes pregnant. She fears her baby has been claimed for evil purposes. The narrative required a building that felt isolating, old world, slightly sinister. The Dakota was perfect. Polanski did not film inside actual Dakota apartments. Residents would never have allowed that intrusion. Instead, he used the building's exterior and recreated the interior on sound stages. But the exterior was enough. That Gothic facade, that guarded archway, those thick walls and inward-facing windows. The Dakota's architecture became the visual language of paranoia and occult menace. The film, released in 1968, to critical acclaim and commercial success. Audiences embraced its slow-building dread, its ambiguous ending, its suggestion that evil could exist behind respectable facades. And they associated all of that with the Dakota, the building where Rosemary lived, the building where witches gathered, the building where innocence was corrupted. Fiction and reality merged in public consciousness. People who had never heard of the Dakota suddenly knew it as the satanic apartment building from that movie. Tour guides began including it on routes through the Upper West Side. Curious onlookers stood outside the archway, peering in, hoping to glimpse something dark or unusual. The building's management increased security. Residents complained about intrusions, but the association was permanent. Rosemary's Baby transformed the Dakota's reputation from quietly strange to explicitly sinister. The whispers that had circulated among staff and residents now reached mainstream audiences. The building was not just haunted, it was cursed. Not just exclusive, it was dangerous. Some residents found this amusing, a bit of Hollywood nonsense that would fade when the next film captured public attention. Others found it disturbing. They had chosen the Dakota for privacy, for separation from public scrutiny. Now their home was a tourist attraction associated with devil worship. But the film's impact went deeper than publicity. It validated decades of rumor. All those stories about seances, strange occurrences, unexplained deaths, they suddenly seemed less like gossip and more like evidence. If Hollywood chose the Dakota to represent occult evil, perhaps Hollywood recognized something true about the building. Perhaps fiction was simply revealing what residents had known all along. This logic was backwards, of course. Polanski chose the Dakota for its architecture, not its supernatural history. The building looked the part, that was all. But perception does not require logic. It requires repetition. And Rosemary's Baby repeated the message millions of times. The Dakota equals darkness. The film also attracted a specific kind of attention. People interested in the occult began seeking apartments there. They wanted to live where energy allegedly gathered, where boundaries between worlds supposedly thinned. The co-op board rejected these applicants naturally. The Dakota had standards. But the applications kept coming. By 1970, the Dakota's dual identity was complete. It remained one of Manhattan's most prestigious addresses, home to accomplished artists, musicians, and professionals. And it was also America's most famous haunted building, associated with satanic rituals and supernatural evil. Both identities were real. Both shaped how people experienced the building. Residents could dismiss the supernatural narrative as Hollywood invention, or they could embrace it as confirmation of what they had always suspected. Either way, the Dakota was no longer just a fortress. It was a symbol of isolation, of secrecy, of the darkness that luxury could not prevent. And then, in 1973, John Lennon arrived. Chapter 7. A Building That Watches. Residents began to describe the Dakota not as shelter, but as something observant and heavy. John Lennon and Yoko Ono purchased a Dakota apartment in 1973 for $300,000. The unit occupied parts of the 7th floor, overlooking 72nd Street and Central Park. 25 rooms, high ceilings, original details preserved from 1884. It was exactly the kind of space that celebrity wealth demanded and the Dakota traditionally provided. But Lennon's arrival changed the building's relationship with the outside world. Previous residents valued privacy. Lennon attracted crowds. Fans gathered outside the archway daily. Photographers waited for glimpses. Reporters asked doormen questions. The fortress that had successfully maintained separation for 90 years suddenly found itself under siege by global attention. The co-op board had debated Lennon's application extensively. His wealth was unquestionable. His fame was the problem. Fame brought noise, crowds, disruption, everything the Dakota was designed to prevent. But Lennon and Ono promised discretion. They wanted sanctuary, not publicity. They would respect the building's culture of privacy. The board approved. For a while, the arrangement worked. Lennon and Ono kept to themselves. They renovated their apartment, combining multiple units into a sprawling residence. They installed recording equipment. They filled rooms with art, instruments, and the accumulated possessions of extremely public lives. The apartment became a retreat where they could escape the demands of fame. But fame does not respect walls, even walls 16 inches thick. Fans who could not reach Lennon personally began treating the Dakota itself as a shrine. They left messages at the archway. They took photographs. They waited, hoping for a chance encounter. Security increased. Staff received instructions to turn away anyone without business inside. The building's defensive architecture, designed for 1984 sensibilities, now faced 1970s celebrity culture. The tools were not adequate. Residents noticed changes in the building's atmosphere, not supernatural changes, psychological ones. The constant presence of strangers outside created tension inside. People felt watched, not by ghosts, by cameras, by crowds. The privacy that the Dakota had guaranteed for nearly a century felt compromised. Lennon himself described the apartment in interviews as both peaceful and oppressive. He loved the space, the history, the separation from street-level chaos. But he also felt the weight of living in a building that carried so much mythology. The Rosemary's Baby connection amused him initially. Then it began to feel appropriate. The Dakota did have a presence, something beyond architecture, something that made you aware of your smallness within its thick walls. Yoko Ono was more explicit. She felt the building watching, not malevolently, not protectively, just observing, as if the 90 years of accumulated lives, deaths, secrets, and stories had created a kind of ambient consciousness. The Dakota was not haunted by individual spirits. It was saturated with collective memory. This description matched what environmental psychologists were beginning to understand about fortress architecture. Buildings designed for extreme isolation create psychological effects. Thick walls that prevent sound also prevent the casual human contact that reminds us we are not alone. And courtyards that face inward create visual loops where residents see only each other, reinforcing tribal boundaries. Security measures that keep strangers out also trap residents inside limited social networks. The Dakota had been designed with these features intentionally. They were considered positive in 1884. Separation meant safety. Privacy meant status. But by 1975, after decades of accumulation, those same features created a sense of enclosure that some residents found suffocating. Lennon described feeling both protected and trapped. The Dakota kept the world at bay, but it also limited his world to what existed within those thick walls. He could not walk to the corner store without encountering fans, could not sit in the park without photographers. But the fortress that was supposed to provide freedom had become a gilded cage. Other residents reported similar feelings, though less dramatically. The Dakota was supposed to be a sanctuary, and it was. But sanctuaries require boundaries, and boundaries, maintained too rigidly for too long, begin to feel like prisons. The building's architecture reinforced this psychological state. Long hallways with few windows created disorientation. Identical doors every 20 feet made it easy to forget which apartment was yours. The central courtyard, beautiful during the day, became shadowy and strange at night. These were not design flaws. They were intentional features meant to create an environment separate from the city. But separation, taken far enough, becomes alienation. By 1978, Lennon had largely withdrawn from public life, and he stayed inside the Dakota, caring for his young son, baking bread, living what he described as a domestic existence. The world's most famous musician, sealed inside a fortress, living a life of deliberate isolation. The irony was not lost on anyone. The Dakota had been built to protect the wealthy from the chaos of New York, and it succeeded, perhaps too well. The protection had become confinement. The privacy had become loneliness. The fortress had become exactly what it was designed to be. And that design, perfect in 1884, felt increasingly wrong in 1980. But worse than wrong, vulnerable. Chapter 8. Fame walks through the gate. Global fame arrived quietly, carrying guitars, vinyl records, and unimaginable attention. John Lennon was not the Dakota's first celebrity resident. Actors, musicians, and cultural figures had lived there for decades. But Lennon represented something different. He was not merely famous. He was historically significant. A Beatle, a voice that had shaped an entire generation. And by 1980, after 5 years of domestic retreat, he was preparing to re-enter public life. His new album, Double Fantasy, was scheduled for release in November 1980. It would be his first new music in 5 years. The announcement generated immediate global interest. Lennon gave interviews. He appeared on radio programs. He discussed his time away, his life at the Dakota, his decision to return to music. The fortress that had protected his privacy was about to be tested by renewed fame. The Dakota's management prepared for increased attention, more security, stricter protocols for visitors, clear instructions to staff about protecting resident privacy. But these measures assumed that danger would come from outside, from overzealous fans trying to force their way into the building, from photographers seeking unauthorized images, from the kind of intrusions that wealth and walls could prevent. No one considered that danger might walk through the gate willingly. Mark David Chapman arrived in New York in early December 1980. He was 25 years old. He had flown from Hawaii with a specific purpose. He carried a recently purchased Charter Arms .38 caliber revolver and 5 hollow point bullets. He also carried a copy of Lennon's new album, which he hoped to have signed. Chapman had been obsessed with Lennon for years, not as a fan, as a target. He believed Lennon was a hypocrite, a wealthy man preaching peace, a celebrity living in luxury while singing about equality. Chapman wanted to expose that hypocrisy. He wanted to be remembered for something significant. And killing John Lennon in Chapman's deteriorating mental state seemed like the most significant thing he could do. On December 8, 1980, Chapman waited outside the Dakota. He stood among other fans who gathered there regularly, hoping for autographs or photographs. He blended in perfectly. Just another person drawn to the building by Lennon's fame. Security noticed nothing unusual. Why would they? The Dakota's defenses were designed for a different era, for threats that announced themselves, for dangers that looked dangerous. Lennon and Ono left the building that afternoon around 5 o'clock. They were heading to a recording session. Chapman approached with his album copy. Lennon signed it. A photographer captured the moment. Lennon and Chapman standing together outside the archway. A celebrity and his killer. A fortress and its failure. Hours later, around 10:50 that night, Lennon and Ono returned. Their car pulled up to the 72nd Street entrance. They stepped onto the sidewalk. They walked toward the archway. Chapman, who had waited for hours, stepped from the shadows. He called out. Lennon turned. Chapman fired 5 times. 4 bullets hit Lennon, back and shoulder. The hollow points did catastrophic damage. Lennon staggered forward into the archway he had passed through thousands of times and collapsed in the guardhouse. The fortress walls that had stood for 96 years, designed to keep danger out, could not save him. Dorman J. Hastings cradled Lennon until police arrived. Ono screamed. Chapman stood calmly, reading his copy of The Catcher in the Rye, waiting to be arrested. The police car that arrived first made the decision not to wait for an ambulance. They put Lennon in the back seat and drove to Roosevelt Hospital. He was pronounced dead on arrival at 11:15 p.m. The fortress had failed in the most absolute way possible. News spread globally within hours. Crowds gathered outside the Dakota. Mourners placed flowers, candles, and handwritten notes along the sidewalk. The archway became a memorial. The building that had spent nearly a century maintaining privacy became the focal point of worldwide grief. Yoko Ono remained in the apartment. Security prevented anyone from entering. The Dakota's co-op board met in emergency session. How should they respond? What could they say? The building was not responsible for what happened. Chapman was. But the building was where it happened. The archway was now crime scene, memorial, and symbol. Within days, the Dakota's reputation underwent its final transformation. It was no longer just exclusive or haunted or famous. It was tragic. The place where John Lennon died. The fortress that could not protect him. The ultimate failure of isolation as a strategy for safety. The world would never forget what happened there. Neither would the building. Chapter 9. The Night the Gate Failed. On a cold December evening, the fortress meant to protect finally proved powerless. The immediate aftermath of John Lennon's death was chaos contained by architecture. Inside the Dakota, Residents locked their doors and drew curtains. Outside, thousands gathered. Grief poured onto 72nd Street in the form of candles, flowers, songs, and tears. The building that had maintained rigid boundaries for 96 years suddenly found itself at the center of global mourning. Police established barricades. The Dakota's entrance archway became a crime scene. Photographers captured every angle. News crews broadcast from across the street. The privacy that residents had purchased at premium prices evaporated overnight. The fortress walls still stood, but they no longer protected anyone from attention. Yoko Ono made one brief statement. She asked for privacy. She asked people to honor Lennon's memory through silence rather than gathering. But grief does not follow instructions. The crowds remained for days. Pilgrims traveled from across the country to stand outside the building where Lennon died. The archway became a shrine. People left messages, photographs, personal items. The Dakota staff collected these offerings daily, unsure what to do with them. Inside, residents struggled with conflicting emotions. Many had respected Lennon, some had been friendly with him. His death was a personal loss. But the aftermath was also an invasion. The constant noise, the cameras, the strangers demanding to be let inside to pay respects. The Dakota had been built to prevent exactly this kind of intrusion, and now it was powerless to stop it. The building's co-op board met multiple times in December 1980. They discussed increased security measures, permanent changes to entry protocols, and legal strategies for managing the building's sudden unwanted fame. But these were logistical responses to a symbolic crisis. The Dakota's core promise that walls and wealth could create safety had been definitively disproven. Mark David Chapman's arrest and trial revealed details that made the failure even more stark. Chapman had waited outside the Dakota for hours. Security had seen him. Staff had walked past him. Other residents had noticed him standing there. But he looked like a fan, harmless, the kind of person who gathered outside celebrity homes. Nothing about his appearance suggested danger. This was the fortress's fundamental weakness. It could prevent forced entry. It could monitor who walked through the archway. But it could not identify intent. Chapman did not need to break down walls, so he simply waited in a public space until his target appeared. The Dakota's defenses, elaborate and expensive, were irrelevant against someone willing to wait. The trial also revealed Chapman's motivations. He was not a political extremist, not a random madman. He was a disturbed individual who believed killing Lennon would make him significant. He chose Lennon specifically because Lennon was famous and accessible. Other celebrities lived in heavily guarded compounds. Lennon lived in a building with a single archway entrance, an archway anyone could stand near, an archway that assumed wealth and architecture provided sufficient protection. They did not. By January 1981, the immediate chaos subsided. Crowds diminished. News crews moved on to other stories. The Dakota returned to something resembling normalcy. But the building had changed. Not physically. The walls remained 16 inches thick. The courtyard still faced inward. The entrances were still guarded. But the psychology had shifted. Residents who had felt protected now felt exposed. The Dakota's isolation, once comforting, now felt dangerous. If something happened, if someone needed help, would those thick walls prevent assistance from arriving in time? Would the privacy that kept neighbors distant also keep them from intervening in emergencies? Security increased dramatically. The building hired additional guards, installed new cameras, implemented stricter visitor protocols. These measures made residents feel slightly safer, but everyone understood the fundamental truth. No amount of security could prevent what had happened to Lennon. Chapman had not broken any rules until he fired. He had waited in a public space, legal, unremarkable. And then, in seconds, he had shattered the fortress's central promise. The Dakota's mythology absorbed this tragedy and transformed it. The building that had been associated with ghosts and occult rumors now carried the weight of documented, witnessed death. Not a mysterious accident, not an unexplained suicide, a murder, committed in the archway designed to protect residents. The fortress had failed its most basic function, and yet the Dakota endured. Apartments did not lose value, residents did not flee. The co-op board continued rejecting applicants. The building remained prestigious, exclusive, desirable. Because wealth, once established, does not disappear simply because its symbols are tarnished. But something had broken. The illusion that isolation equals safety. The belief that wealth can purchase protection from the world's dangers. The idea that thick walls and guarded gates create sanctuary. December the 8th, 1980, proved that none of this was true. Tragedy reached through the archway and took what it wanted. The fortress could not stop it. All it could do was witness. Chapter 10, After the Silence. In the days after the shooting, the Dakota did not change, but the world's perception of it did. The first few months of 1981 brought a strange, heavy silence to the Dakota. Residents spoke in hushed tones. Staff moved cautiously. The building that had always valued privacy now practiced it defensively, as if noise itself might invite further tragedy. Yoko Ono remained in the apartment she had shared with Lennon, eyes surrounded by grief and memories. Media attention gradually shifted from the building to Chapman's trial. The public needed to understand why. They needed explanations, motivations, some framework that made senseless violence comprehensible. Chapman provided those explanations in interviews. His obsession with the catcher in the rye, his belief that Lennon was a phony, his desire for fame. None of it made the murder less senseless, but it redirected attention away from the Dakota itself. The building's management worked deliberately to restore its pre-tragedy reputation. They emphasized security improvements. They highlighted the building's continued exclusivity. They reminded potential buyers and current residents that the Dakota remained one of Manhattan's premier addresses. Tragedy did not diminish property values. If anything, the association with Lennon increased cultural significance. This was true. By mid-1981, Dakota apartments were selling for record prices. Not in spite of Lennon's death, but partially because of it. The building had become historically important. Living there meant living in a place that would be remembered. That carried weight beyond mere luxury. But current residents wrestled with more complex emotions. Some felt the building's reputation had been unfairly tarnished. The Dakota did not kill Lennon. Chapman did. Blaming the building, or its security, or its design, was misplaced anger. Others felt the tragedy revealed something true about the fortress mentality. That isolation, taken to extremes, creates vulnerability rather than safety. These perspectives coexisted uneasily. Dakota residents valued exclusivity. That had always been the building's selling point. But post-Lennon, exclusivity felt different. Less like privilege, more like exposure. The building that had promised separation from the world had instead become the world's most famous address associated with celebrity death. Yoko Ono eventually left the apartment. not permanently. She maintained ownership, but she could not live there constantly. The space held too much grief. She would return periodically, spend time in the room she and Lennon had shared, then leave again. The apartment became a shrine of sorts, private, inaccessible, but known. Across the street from the Dakota in Central Park, the city created Strawberry Fields, a memorial garden dedicated to Lennon's memory. The centerpiece was a mosaic with the word "Imagine" embedded in the pathway. This memorial shifted some of the mourning energy away from the Dakota's archway. People could visit Strawberry Fields instead of gathering outside the building. Residents appreciated this. It provided a designated space for public grief that was not their front door. But the association remained permanent. The Dakota and Lennon were now inseparable in cultural memory. Tour buses began, including the building en routes. Guides told Lennon's story, pointed out the archway, described the shooting. The building that had spent a century avoiding publicity became a mandatory stop on tragedy tourism circuits. The Dakota's co-op board responded by becoming even more selective. If the building was going to be famous, it would be famous on its own terms. Application rejection rates increased. Rules about media engagement tightened. Residents who gave interviews about the building faced social pressure from neighbors. The fortress mentality, challenged by Lennon's death, responded by fortifying further. This reaction was understandable, but incomplete. The tragedy had revealed that walls alone cannot provide safety. But rather than questioning walls, the Dakota built them higher, metaphorically at least. The physical structure remained unchanged, but the psychological barriers, the social requirements, the unspoken rules about discretion and privacy all intensified. By the mid-1980s, the Dakota had achieved a strange equilibrium. It remained prestigious. Apartments still commanded premium prices. The co-op board still wielded absolute power over who could live there. But underneath that continuity, the building carried new meaning. It was no longer just exclusive. It was marked, not cursed exactly, but shadowed. A place where beauty and tragedy coexisted, where luxury could not prevent loss, where the promise of protection had failed in the most public way possible, and yet people still wanted to live there. Perhaps because of the shadow, not despite it. The Dakota offered something most buildings could not: history, significance, the certainty that this place mattered, that events which occurred here would be remembered, even if those events were terrible. Chapter 11, a living relic of fear. Today, the Dakota remains private, guarded, and strangely untouched by time. In 2025, a Dakota apartment can sell for anywhere between $5 million and $30 million, depending on size, floor, and condition. These prices reflect not just Manhattan real estate trends, but the building's unique cultural position. You are not simply buying an apartment. You are buying into mythology, into history, into a structure that has survived 141 years without compromising its core identity. The co-op board remains notoriously selective. Approval requires unanimous consent from all board members. Applicants undergo extensive interviews. Financial records are scrutinized. Professional backgrounds examined. Personal references contacted. Wealth alone guarantees nothing. The board seeks residents who understand the Dakota's culture, who value privacy, who will not disrupt the building's carefully maintained equilibrium. Celebrity applicants face particular scrutiny. The board learned from Lennon's death that fame attracts attention. The Dakota cannot control. Since 1980, multiple high-profile applications have been rejected. Actors, musicians, business moguls, some because their fame would bring crowds, others because their personalities seemed incompatible with the building's quiet culture. The board never explains rejections. It simply says no. Current residents include artists, retired executives, and inherited wealth. People who appreciate the building's architectural significance, who respect its history, who understand that living at the Dakota means accepting certain responsibilities. You do not speak to press. You do not host loud parties. You do not draw attention. The building's reputation depends on discretion. And residents who violate these unspoken rules find themselves socially isolated within the community. The physical structure has been meticulously maintained. Original details from 1884 remain intact. The courtyard, the archway, the thick walls. Modern updates occur invisibly. Electrical systems have been upgraded, plumbing replaced, security enhanced, but nothing visible has changed. The Dakota looks almost identical to how it appeared in 1884. This preservation is intentional. The building's value lies partly in its refusal to modernize aesthetically. The haunting rumors persist. Current residents rarely discuss them publicly, but private conversations acknowledge strange occurrences, unexplained sounds in hallways, cold spots that defy explanation, a general sense of being observed. Some residents dismiss these as architectural quirks. Others believe the building holds residual energy from decades of accumulated lives and deaths. No scientific studies have validated supernatural claims, but absence of evidence does not diminish belief. The Dakota's thick walls and unusual design create acoustic and thermal phenomena that could explain many strange experiences. Sound travels unexpectedly through 16-inch brick walls. Temperature variations occur in buildings this old. Shadows and reflections create optical illusions in long hallways with multiple light sources. But explanations do not eliminate unease. Living at the Dakota means living with its history. Every resident knows about Lennon, about Rosemary's baby, about the deaths, rumors, and tragedies that preceded them. This knowledge shapes experience. A normal creak becomes significant. An unexpected draft becomes eerie. The building's reputation creates interpretive frameworks that make ordinary events feel supernatural. The Dakota also carries significant cultural weight. It appears in films, television shows, and literature as shorthand for wealthy urban mystery. Filmmakers use its exterior to establish tone. Writers reference it to signal exclusivity and danger. The building has become a character in American popular culture, a symbol of the ways wealth isolates, protects, and ultimately fails to prevent tragedy. Tourism continues. People visit strawberry fields, then walk to the Dakota to see where Lennon died. They photograph the archway. They read plaques. They discuss what happened. Security monitors these visitors, but cannot prevent them. The archway opens onto a public sidewalk. Anyone can stand there. Anyone can look. This creates ongoing tension. Residents value privacy. Tourists seek access. The building exists at the intersection of these incompatible desires. It is a private residence with public significance, a home that is also a landmark, a fortress that cannot fully close its gates because history happened there. Property values continue climbing, despite tragedy, despite hauntings, despite or perhaps because of the building's dark reputation. Scarcity drives demand. Only 73 apartments exist. Turnover is minimal. When units become available, bidding exceeds asking prices. Buyers compete desperately for the privilege of living in a building that most New Yorkers can only observe from outside. The Dakota's financial success proves something uncomfortable. Tragedy increases value. Darkness adds mystique. The building is more desirable now, after Lennon's death, than it would be without that history. Real estate markets are amoral. They respond to scarcity and significance. The Dakota possesses both, and so it endures. 141 years old, slightly haunted, definitely infamous, still exclusive, still expensive, still promising protection it cannot guarantee, still attracting residents who believe thick walls and careful screening create safety. The fortress stands, but the gate remains open. Chapter 12. What fortresses invite inside. The Dakota still stands, unmoved by myth, money, or mourning, but not unchanged. Every building tells a story about what its creators feared and what they valued. The Dakota's story is remarkably clear. Edward Clark feared proximity. He feared the mixing of classes. He feared the chaos of an expanding city. And he valued separation, privacy, the ability to live among equals and exclude everyone else. These fears and values were not unusual for 1879. They reflected the anxieties of industrial-era wealth. Money arrived suddenly for many families. Fortunes built on machines, railroads, and mass production. This new wealth wanted old respectability. It wanted barriers that could not be crossed by people who lacked the right backgrounds, connections, education. The Dakota provided those barriers: physical walls, social screening, architectural design that enforced separation. It succeeded brilliantly at its intended purpose. For over a century, it has maintained exclusivity, protected privacy, kept the wrong people out. But the building also demonstrates a fundamental paradox. The more you isolate yourself, the more vulnerable you become. Not to physical danger, necessarily, to loneliness, to distorted perception, to the belief that walls can solve problems that walls cannot address. Lennon's death proved this paradox in the starkest possible terms. The fortress designed to protect failed because it could not screen for intent. Chapman looked harmless. He waited patiently. He followed rules until the moment he did not. No wall could have stopped that. No amount of wealth could have prevented it. The Dakota's defensive architecture was irrelevant. This does not mean the building is at fault. Buildings are not moral agents. They do not choose their residents or their histories. The Dakota is brick, stone, iron, and plaster arranged according to 19th century assumptions about safety and status. Those assumptions were wrong, but wrongness does not constitute guilt. What the Dakota represents, then, is a cautionary lesson about the limits of isolation. Wealth can purchase space. It can purchase privacy. It can purchase thick walls and guarded gates. But it cannot purchase safety from randomness, from tragedy, from the violence that exists in human hearts. Those threats pass through barriers as if barriers do not exist. The haunting rumors, whether true or false, add another dimension to this lesson. If we accept, even hypothetically, that buildings can hold energy, that spaces accumulate the emotional residue of everything that occurs within them, then the Dakota would be saturated. 141 years of lives, deaths, fears, and twin secrets, all of it contained by those 16-inch walls, all of it pressing against residents who may or may not feel its weight. This interpretation is unfalsifiable. We cannot measure emotional residue. We cannot prove or disprove that spaces remember. But the persistence of these beliefs across decades and cultures suggests something real. Not ghosts, necessarily, but the human need to make meaning from place, to understand our environments as more than neutral containers, to believe that where we live matters in ways beyond square footage and property values. The Dakota matters. It has always mattered. First as a symbol of industrial wealth's arrival, then as a fortress against urban chaos, then as a haven for artists and celebrities, then as the site of tragedy, now as all of these things simultaneously. A building that contains multitudes, that refuses to be reduced to a single interpretation. For current residents, this creates a strange daily experience. They live in luxury, in history, in shadow. They enjoy privileges that most people will never access, but they also carry knowledge that those privileges did not protect Lennon, will not protect them, cannot protect anyone from the fundamental uncertainty of existence. This knowledge could inspire two responses. It could motivate opening up, lowering walls, recognizing that isolation creates illusions of safety without actual safety. Or it could motivate further fortification, higher walls, stricter screening, deeper withdrawal from a world that proved dangerous. The Dakota has chosen the second path. Since Lennon's death, the building has become more exclusive, not less. Application standards have tightened. Privacy rules have intensified. The fortress has fortified. This response is understandable, but it is also tragic, because it suggests that the lesson has not been learned, that walls still feel like solutions, that separation still feels like safety. Perhaps that is the final truth about the Dakota. It is a building that learned nothing from its own history. It continues operating according to assumptions that have been repeatedly proven false. It still promises protection, still values exclusivity, still believes that the right barriers, properly maintained, can keep danger out. And people still believe that promise, still compete to live there, still pay millions for the privilege of thick walls and guarded gates. It still imagine that enough money can purchase immunity from the tragedies that affect everyone else. The Dakota stands as monument to this belief, not cursed, not evil, simply wrong. A fortress that never worked as intended. A barrier that invited exactly what it was built to prevent. A reminder that we cannot wall ourselves away from darkness. We can only choose how we respond when it arrives, and it always arrives.